Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is second bite at the cherry in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31. First tenet of the Shinobi Neutrality Pact. All villages who henceforth sign this agreement are to be considered equal, regardless of size, economic status, and military strength. Shinobi equipment, check. Several months of aiding the Tsuchikage and taking odd jobs around the village had filled her wallet enough to invest in some higher quality supplies. No longer was she carrying shabby, second-rate kunao that she'd only barely been able to afford on a genin salary. Now her kunao were made of rare IWA iron, sharp enough that she'd nicked herself on accident just handling the damn things. Explosive tags? Hundreds. Storage scrolls. Enough that she probably needed a storage scroll just to put her scrolls in. Medical supplies, food, pills, rations, traps, and finally, the most important part. The signed draft of the Shinobi Neutrality Pact. Sakura kept this draft in a sealing scroll. She kept that scroll in another sealing scroll that required her blood to unlock, and that scroll was kept in the inner pocket of her jacket, where no one could swipe it from her. There were extra copies of the draft, of course, but this was the signed copy, the important one that she'd be carrying with her from village to village. If anything happened to it, well, it would be a pain to get it all signed again, and Sakura was trying to avoid pain as much as possible for this journey. All of this gear had to be contained on her person, and though most of the gear could be kept in sealing scrolls for when it was needed, the majority of her new weaponry had to be immediately accessible. Sakura had never had so many sharp objects in her life, let alone within her arm's reach at all times. Kurotsuki had walked her through places to conceal shuriken and kunao, from simple belt pouches to small slings hidden on the back straps of her bra. She was a diplomat now, Kurotsuki had insisted, and a woman on top of that, which meant she had to be armed and ready for the worst at all times. Sakura would make enemies. There would be people who try to take advantage of her. As a shinobi, Sakura had known this, but never in a million years would she ever have been this prepared without Kurotsuki's help. She'd later give a side-eye to Kakashi, who really should have emphasized this with all of Team 7. But, she supposed, out of the powerhouses that made up Team 7, she probably was the only one who really needed to be paranoid. No one was stupid enough to sneak up on an Uchiha or a Jinchuriki. The winter months had long faded into spring, with a hint of summer on the horizon. Sakura had long since given up her thick winter coat. Initially she had settled back into her usual cheongsam, but Kurotsuki had once again stepped in to provide advice. A kunoichi could look fashionable, she insisted, but still practical. A typical civilian cheongsam had no pockets or concealments to store anything useful. There was nothing in the fabric that provided any sort of defense against the elements or against enemy blades. It was better for a shinobi to avoid taking hits to begin with, but in case of emergency, it was better to have something more protective. Thankfully, Kurotsuki had said with a grin, Sakura had ended up in the right place. IWA, more so than perhaps any other shinobi village, was prized for its metalwork and armor. There were a plethora of blacksmiths and weavers in the village to choose from, and it hadn't taken long at all before Sakura was able to commission something to her liking. One armorer specialized in an extremely lightweight chainmail, not something that would save her from crushing blows or high-powered ninjutsu, but would deflect most common kunao and shuriken. Sakura could layer a more customized cheongsam over the mail, and if she coupled that with a pocketed vest, she gained a look that was one part fashionable and several parts practical. Sakura couldn't wait to see the look on Ino's face when she next reached Konoha. Sakura was also encouraged to invest in shin guards and arm bracers. The last thing Sakura wanted was to lose a hand or a leg in battle, even if she'd seen a legless IWA Jounin pull off some pretty impressive jutsu. Better safe than sorry was the motto, and by the time Sakura had settled on her new choice in attire, she had to admit that she looked far more like a warrior than the young girl who had snuck away from her village home. Maybe even like someone that the other village leaders would take seriously. The other leaders. Sakura swallowed hard as she finished checking her apartment. Really, she was just stalling. She'd gotten so used to living in IWA that she wasn't quite sure she wanted to leave. IWA was comfortable. IWA could be a home, much like Konoha had been a home. But it was easy to get attached to somewhere stable. Easy to get attached to people who treated you with respect and assumed you were every bit as strong as they were. Easy to get attached to somewhere with a bed. There was absolutely nothing more for her to pack, however. The apartment was as empty as when she first arrived in IWA. She made her way to the bathroom mirror, fiddling with her hair in an attempt to get herself another couple minutes. Her hand briefly brushed against the red ribbon holding her hair up, Ino's ribbon. Ever since she'd left behind her Konoha headband, she'd been using the ribbon to keep her hair out of her eyes, but there was also a large bit of sentiment behind it. It was Ino, long before anyone else, who had seen potential in her. Ino who had helped her to find confidence. In a strange way, looking at the ribbon helped steady her nerves. Even if she was heading into the unknown, people believed in her. She could be confident. She could be strong. She was a kunoichi, and she was going to work to unite the shinobi nations. Sakura took a deep breath and made her way out of the apartment. She would be taking a side road through one of the surrounding mountains, putting her on a path straight to the village hidden in waterfalls. Takigakure. It was a small village, but it supposedly housed the Jinhiriki of the seven-tailed beast, which meant that Sakura had double the invested interest in going there. She needed to convince the leader of the village to sign the treaty, and she needed to meet with the Jinhiriki, or at least let Gaara meet with them. Gaara had made friends with the IWA Jinhiriki surprisingly easy. Perhaps Jinhiriki just understood each other best. That was right, she reminded herself. This wasn't just her own mission. This wasn't just about the Neutrality Pact. She was also helping Gaara learn about himself and meet others like him. She was helping him get out of his shell. Already the boy was almost unrecognizable from the boy she'd seen at the Chiryunin exams all those months ago. He seemed to be smiling all the time, he talked with her more than ever, and, though Sakura supposed this was half due to IWA not knowing Gaara was a Jinhiriki, he had even gathered enough confidence to speak with IWA residents when the need arrived. She wasn't the only one who had grown out here in IWA. Gaara, too. She caught sight of him as she made her way to the side road Oniki told her about. He was still wearing the long, brown coat he'd gotten on the way up the mountain, and it appeared as though his sand gourd had been permanently changed into a sand scroll. Anyone outside of Suna or Konoha would be hard-pressed to recognize the Sullen Ichibai Jinhiriki at this point, and Sakura was counting on it. Several others were also waiting at the village exit. Sai in particular looked ready to go, and Kakashi had brought a small backpack. Konoha would be her next stop after Taki, so it made sense to travel together. Not that she didn't feel safe traveling just with Gaara, but having the Umbu and her old Jounin sensei on her team was just extra safety, and there wasn't anything wrong with that. A smile came to her face as she saw Oniki and several other IWA shinobi waiting at the exit as well. Kuratsuke, Akatsuki, even Han and Rashi had gathered by Gaara, with the latter ruffling the boy's hair roughly as they exchanged words. Sakura focused on this. Focused on Oniki's grandfatherly smile, Kuratsuke's proud stance, the way Han and Rashi fathered over Gaara. Every village she would be going to was full of people like these, people with families, with dreams, with fears, people. Not just the legends she read in her history book. She shook her head. Now wasn't the time to be apprehensive of the future. Now was the time for a bittersweet goodbye. Remember every damn thing I taught you, girl. Oniki insisted as he looked her up and down. Innovation before strength. Every shinobi can throw a shuriken or swing a sword, but you've got a brain. Use it. Yes, sensei. Sakura gave Oniki a respectful nod. And make sure you remember the differences between mountain terrain and dash. Lord Tsuchikage, I'm sure Sakura doesn't need reminding. Kuratsuka stepped in, shaking her head. You drilled earth layers into her head for 4 weeks straight, remember? And she'd damn well better remember them. I will, sensei, I promise. Sakura bowed. And I look forward to sending you the good news as everyone else sees the treaty. That's my girl. Oniki grinned, and that was that. Goodbyes were said, and before long Sakura was walking through the mountain tunnel and on her way out of IWA. I spy with my little eye, something that starts with G. It was quiet for a while, before Gaara finally spoke up. Grass. Nope. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura had never seen the Jounin look so annoyed in all her time knowing him. It was clear he wasn't used to playing traveling games, but she wasn't going to stop. Gaara enjoyed them. And maybe she got a mischievous sense of satisfaction seeing her sensei forced to play along. Ground. Kakashi mumbled. Nope. You're all horribly blind. Sai spoke up, fake smile wide on his face. It's obviously granite. It's what's making up several of the nearby rock formations. Got it. Sakura gave Sai a big smile in turn. That's 7 points to Sai, 5 points to Gaara, and 1 point for Kakashi. Is this really what you were doing the entire way from Suna to IWA? Kakashi asked. It's not the only thing I'm doing. Sakura admitted. I'm attempting to master my sensing jutsu while my mind is otherwise occupied. A good shinobi is able to maintain their guard while distracted by mundane conversation, right? You know, I told you that, my darling student, but you could stand to pick something less mundane. Kakashi muttered, pulling out one of his many smutty books as they walked. Like, where you found the scroll you learned that sensing jutsu from. I told you. Sakura said innocently. I just found it. You can just find things. Ah yes. You just found a scroll with several S-ranked jutsu just lying around, unsupervised, unguarded. Sakura frowned. Kakashi was getting way too close to the truth. There was a part of her that wanted to come clean about the scroll. Maybe Kakashi could secretly return it without causing a fuss, but damn it all, she'd worked hard for that scroll and she still hadn't learned everything in it yet. And it was entirely possible Kakashi or Sai could use the scroll against her and the Neutrality Project, could claim that a thief shouldn't be an ambassador, but Sakura just couldn't bring herself to lie about where she found it. She felt as though Kakashi would see right through anything she came up with. Thankfully, before Kakashi could interrogate her further, the path wound its way past the walls of mountain and suddenly a clear view stood out in the distance. The ocean. Sakura had known they were on the northern end of IWA territory, but she hadn't expected to travel so close to the sea. She hadn't seen the ocean since the Land of Waves, a time that suddenly seemed much longer ago than she used to picture it. The ocean to the south had been cold, covered in fog, almost dreary. The ocean out here, well, it was still cold out, but with the sun reflecting on the waves and the bright blue sky above it, there was something warm about how the view looked. Something that made Sakura want to run down the mountain to the water's edge. And she wasn't the only one, by the look of it. She felt movement next to her, and when she turned she saw Gaara looking out to the ocean, his eyes wider than she'd ever seen. Gaara, have you never seen the ocean? He's from Suna. Sai retorted. Of course he hasn't. Suna land barely borders the ocean at all. It's big. Gaara leaped onto the rocks in front of him, squinting as he tried to look to the distance. Really big. Nobody's ever crossed it. Sakura commented, leaping up to join Gaara. Every now and then, supposedly a boat tries, but it's never heard from again. She laughed. Some people think the world is flat and that's where it ends, so the boats have just fallen off. Flat. Gaara looked to Sakura, puzzled. But if it was flat, wouldn't we be able to see the end of it from here? Hey, I never said some people weren't idiots. It's more likely that the ocean is too vast for our ships to cross at this point in time. Sai added, leaping up to the rock as well. The further one goes out into the ocean, the larger the waves become. Simple wooden ships can barely manage. It's that large. Gaara looked back to the ocean. There could be a whole continent on the other side. People who've never heard of shinobi or jinhuriki, or anything like that. I hadn't thought of that. Sakura admitted. Do you think they could still use chakra like we do? Maybe there's a completely different style of jutsu that we can't even dream of. Or maybe they can't use chakra at all. Sai countered. An entire continent of useless civilians. Sakura frowned before punching Sai in the arm. My parents are civilians, thank you very much, and they're not useless. Who do you think builds all the houses in Konoha? Works out all the plumbing? Does all the farming? Shinobi are too high and mighty for all that, after all. Perhaps so. But civilians wouldn't be alive without shinobi to protect them. And shinobi wouldn't be alive if civilians weren't around to do all the work that the shinobi won't. Symbiosis. Gaara suddenly commented. Neither can live without the other. Exactly. Sakura grinned. And if anyone tries to call civilians useless again, I'll throw them into the ocean. She was pleased to see Sai's fake smile falter a little bit. Ah, you know, I've changed my mind. You're not really the ugly type, Sakura. From now on, you're Scary Dot. Sakura couldn't help but be pleased with that new nickname. Gaara was still looking out to the ocean, so Sakura decided to let him have a moment of peace. She turned, meaning to jump down, when she caught sight of Kakashi. He looked, well, the only way she could describe it was sentimental. Like he was watching a scene that reminded him of something he hadn't seen in a long time. A brief look of confusion passed over her before she looked back to Gaara and Sai. And then she saw it too. A Jinchuriki boy, used to being alone, wide-eyed with wonder at the new world around him that he'd never seen before. A withdrawn, dark-haired boy with a troubled past, brash, sometimes a bit rude. Was Kakashi seeing Team 7 too, when he looked at the three of them? It was a strange sentiment to consider, albeit a pointless one. Maybe Gaara would be sticking around with her for the future, but Sai would be returning to Konoha at first opportunity. They weren't a team. Just travelers going in the same direction. But Sakura couldn't deny that the idea of a team still appealed to her. No matter how hard she tried to focus on the new future she was carving for herself, every now and then her thoughts would return to Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto. He'd returned her letters with great enthusiasm, though his handwriting had left a lot to be desired. She'd been surprised to hear that he was studying under Tsunade. It was hard to imagine the blonde having the patience for anything that didn't involve a fist fight, but by the sound of things Tsunade had somehow managed to get him involved in bookwork and village politics. It would be good for him, Sakura thought with a smile. A Hokage would need to be able to excel in all parts of leading a village, not just defending it. And Tsunade was smart enough that Sakura knew she'd teach Naruto well. If anything, Naruto was in the best place he could possibly be. And he was so damn supportive. She'd worried that he'd be angry with her for leaving Konoha, like Sasuke had, but nothing in his letters seemed to show anything but support. He seemed enthusiastic at the prospect of the villages coming together, and even more excited when he'd heard that she was training under the Tsuchikage. When you come back to Konoha, let's spar and see how strong we've gotten, okay? Sakura gripped at her necklace tightly, trying her best not to get emotional. They were out traveling, she could afford to let her feelings slow them down. The Jashin necklace had become a weird sort of comfort to her during her time at IWA. Maybe that weird Akatsuki member had been onto something? No, she didn't want to admit, or maybe she couldn't. It wasn't unusual for her to get emotional, but lately she'd found herself getting embarrassed over it. All of the other women shinobi she knew were so calm and composed, and here she was getting weepy over the fact that Naruto wanted to spar with her, see how strong she'd gotten. Naruto thought of her as an equal. And maybe he'd said praises about her before, it was nothing like that letter had suggested. A spar wasn't something Naruto would ask because he had a crush on her or wanted to garner her affection. Naruto had only ever asked to spar with Sasuke before, because Sasuke was his rival, Sasuke was someone who could challenge him. But with one written sentence, suddenly Sakura was on his level too. Suddenly Sakura could be a challenge. She wondered what Sasuke would think of her now. Would he still see her as an annoyance? Or would he? How strange. Her first thought wasn't about him wanting to date her, but whether or not he'd want to fight her. Sakura. Gaara put a hand on her shoulder, jolting her out of her thoughts. She forced a smile. I'm fine, Gaara. Just thinking, that's all. The ocean sort of brought back some memories. Good ones. Sakura blinked. Gaara was smiling at her, something that still occasionally brought her pause. These past months, they'd really changed both of them. She continued to smile as she spoke. Yeah, you could say that. She glanced over to Kakashi, who'd put on a smile of his own, all traces of that sentimental gaze gone. Shall we get a move on? We've still got a ways to go before we reach Taki. Especially if we stop to sightsee every mile. Sai added dryly. Sakura gently punched him again. Oh, POO on you, sigh. Now I'm gonna make sure we stop every mile to look at something. She slid back down the rock onto the path, looking around briefly. All right, this time, Gaara, you pick things for us to spy, all right? Right. Gaara nodded. They began to walk again, Gaara mulling over his I Spy choice. Out of habit, Sakura put her hands together and let out a sensing pulse. It wasn't as though she expected to find anyone out here, but every bit of practice mattered. Her energy seemed to spread out around her in a wave, pinging around trees and rocks and... Sakura froze. There, in a tree in the distance. That was a chakra signature. Her head shot in the direction of the tree, attempting to see just exactly who it was that had gotten on her radar. For a brief moment, so brief she might have imagined it, she saw a figure buried within the bark of the tree. Half black skin, half white skin, strange plant-like growths around him. Her hand instinctively went to a kunai at her hip, and next to her she felt all three of her companions shift into a defensive stance. But before she could do anything, the figure melted away into tree. Sakura sent out another sensing pulse. Nothing. It was like nobody had been there at all. Sakura. Gaara, everyone, Sakura swallowed, drawing her kunai despite the fact that she could no longer sense the figure. Keep an eye on the trees, will you? I might have imagined it, but how could she have imagined something so strange? Her free hand went to her necklace again. She was in new territory now, and who knew what sort of strange shinobi lived out here? Still, there was something about the man that had given her a distinct sense of unease. Something about the chakra, something about it that... She paused. The chakra. It hadn't had any nature at all, when she had sensed it. It was like the energy had been completely blank. Sakura reached out to take hold of Gaara's hand. Whoever it was, whoever it had been. She had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time she saw them. Chapter 32, Other Worlds, Other Minds, Intermission Part 6. Focus now. Create a clear image in your mind of what you want to show me. Think of each individual detail. Think of sounds, of scents, of anything that your mind can remember. Ino pictured a flower. It was easy to focus on flowers. She'd worked in her mother's flower shop since she was a young girl, and the names and properties of various plants came as naturally to her as breathing. And maybe it was because she'd recently received a letter from Sakura, but her mind drifted to the image of a cherry blossom tree that she often saw on the other side of the village. It had just started to bloom, several small flowers on a tree with a vast trunk and branches that reached into the skies themselves. She let the image in her mind expand to include the entire tree. If she could convey this entirely, it would be impressive, wouldn't it? Something she could use to wow Naruto and Chuji, maybe even get a change in expression from Shikamaru, and when Sakura returned, she just knew this would prove her to be the stronger Kunoichi. What other clan than the Yamanakas had a telepathy technique? It was something Sakura would never be able to copy. I'm ready. Good. Her father's voice echoed over her image of the cherry blossom tree. Now, make the hand sign. Reach out with your mind to touch my own. Ino did so. This technique was different than the mind transfer technique. She wasn't pushing her mental energy from her body in full, she was only really transferring a little piece of it. Her father likened it to a glass of water. She wasn't pouring out the entire glass, but letting a single drop fall from the rim. Just the image. Just the picture of a cherry blossom tree, just starting to bloom, beautiful and strong, like her. Is it a tree? Ino grinned. It was working, she was really doing it. Like an oak tree? Something big, I can't really make out more. Crap. Ino cursed, her technique breaking as she did so. She'd gotten the tree part across, but not the flower? It was the first damn thing she'd thought of. It was a cherry blossom, Dad. Cherry blossom? Oh. Well, you managed to get the branches across, I think. Her father laughed. And to be honest, you're much further along than I was at your age. You might be able to get a full image by the end of the year. I need to do it quicker if I'm going to keep up with Sakura, Dad. Ino protested with a huff. Sakura's training under the Tsuchikage, she's probably learning all sorts of cool jutsu that'll blow people away, and I can't even get more than one clan technique down. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes and concentrating again. One more time, this time I know I can do it. She missed the softened look on her father's face, and the smile that came to it. One more time. He agreed. One more time turned into a dozen, until Ino felt the strain of chakra exhaustion begin to work its way through her body. She'd heard stories, of course, of how the Yamanaka had been able to transfer information across the battlefield in the blink of an eye, keeping squads connected through the sheer telepathic power of their chakra. If she'd been able to do this sort of thing at the Chunin exams, well, it wouldn't have helped her beat Sakura, no, but maybe it could be a stepping stone for something even greater, something that would let her kick Sakura's ass and win the heart of. Ino hesitated. Mentioning Sasuke in the village had become something of a taboo. The majority of the villagers spoke the Uchiha name with either scorn or a pity that resembled grieving. Grieving for what was? Grieving for the fall of the two brothers who had been the pride and joy of one of the village's founding clans. And Ino knew especially not to mention Sasuke around Naruto, not unless she wanted to see the blonde fall into a slump for the rest of the day. Maybe once she'd thought Sasuke handsome, desirable, but now, after seeing the fallout from his leaving, even her past crush seemed soured. She hit the point where her father insisted she take a break, so Ino made her way out into the village for a walk. Perhaps she was just moping, but, well, it was only a matter of time before she mastered that damn technique. And then, bigger and better things, just like Naruto was always talking about. And speaking of, it was supposed to be Team Asuma's day off, but as Ino walked by training ground 12, she noticed a familiar shock of orange and blonde hair lying in the grass. Amused, Ino made her way over to kneel at Naruto's side. Sleeping like a baby. It was easy to overlook how hard the Uzumaki had been working since he'd joined up with Team Asuma. Training under Tsunade and Jiraiya, and going out on missions on top of that. Compared to him, Ino's training was barely anything. Hey, Naruto. Ino poked at the boy's forehead. It's not good to sleep in the grass for so long, you know? You'll end up like Shikamaru. No, 5 more minutes. Idiot. Ino lightly rapped Naruto with her knuckles. Wouldn't you prefer to be in a bed? Bed? But oh. Naruto suddenly shot forward, his hair and jacket covered in grass. I wasn't sleeping. I was training. Training, I promise. Ino couldn't help but laugh. Oh, come on, Naruto, I'm not gonna tell Jiraiya you were sleeping. But this is supposed to be our day off, you know. What were you even practicing? I wasn't practicing anything, actually. Naruto admitted. Not really. I actually, Ino, can you keep a secret? Ino smirked. Naruto, keeping secrets? How incredibly unlike him. She leaned in, her smirk growing mischievous. Wait, don't tell me, are you training to impress a girl, Naruto? And no, not like that. I mean Naruto blushed. I mean it'd be really cool if I could show off to Sakura next time I see her, but this is something different. But, well, I don't really know if I'm supposed to tell you the secret. It's so secret that nobody else our age knows besides Sakura, I'm pretty sure. That secret? Now I really want to know. Ino kept leaning in, now more eager than ever. Come on, I can keep a secret, you can tell me. Tell me. But you might not like me anymore if I tell you. Ino froze. Not like him anymore? Well, Naruto could be a bit of a dolt at times, but what could Naruto have possibly done that would have? I have the nine-tailed fox sealed inside of me, Ino. What? You're joking, Naruto, how could you? Naruto was known for pranking, wasn't he? This was just some silly prank, it had to be. But the way Naruto was looking at her, desperate, worried, looking scared enough that he almost looked sick. The nine-tailed fox. She didn't have any memories of the day when the fox had attacked the village. She hadn't even been a month old. But the stories, she'd heard the stories. Stories about how the monster had killed so many shinobi and civilians, how it was only due to the fourth Hokage that the village survived at all. And Naruto was containing it. So, it's like how Gaara is. Ino found that she wasn't exactly scared to hear about Naruto having a demon inside of him. Sakura had been traveling with that scary Suna shinobi for months now, and the way she wrote about Gaara, it was like the two had been friends all their life. It made sense now, though, why Sakura had suddenly become so interested in Jinchuriki. Her teammate was one. It was stupid that she hadn't seen it earlier. The way Naruto had trounced Neji Hyuga at the Chunin exams, the way he seemed to have such boundless energy in their missions, all that chakra had to come from somewhere, and of course it would come from a Baijuyu. Sakura said Gaara has a Baijuyu inside him too. I think she calls it Shukaku. Ino explained, laughing nervously. I mean, I don't really know that much about it, but you're nowhere near as scary as Gaara, so I don't think I have anything to worry about. Maybe you have the fox, but you're still a dork that falls asleep in the grass and won't eat anything but ramen unless I drag him to the grocery store. You really mean it, Ino? Naruto looked hopeful now, and Ino hadn't realized just how much it meant to him that she, not freak out? It wasn't as though he'd given her a reason to. Naruto wasn't a killer, not like Gaara had been. Naruto was just Naruto. Not a fox. Not a demon. Just regular, old Naruto. Yeah, I mean it. Ino reached out to knock her knuckles against Naruto's head again. And you know, Shikamaru and Chuji won't care about anything like that either. It was starting to make sense now, why the adults always seemed to hate Naruto so much. Ino had thought it was because the boy was a prankster, but, if all people saw was the fox, every time they looked at him, then she thought of how Sakura was, back when she let her hair cover her eyes and was so shy that she could barely speak up for herself. But as soon as she'd started to tie her hair back and show off her face, she'd started to grow more confident. No, that hadn't been it. It wasn't just the ribbon. It'd been her. Ino had been the one to acknowledge her. To be her first friend. Ino had been the one to help her come out of her shell. But if she hadn't gone to Sakura that day, if she hadn't helped her out, what kind of person would Sakura have become? If Naruto didn't have friends, would he have been more like Gaara? Suddenly, Ino felt mad. Mad at the village for shunning Naruto in such a way. Mad that they'd almost made a monster out of Naruto, monster within him notwithstanding. I guess I kind of expected you to freak out more. Ino snapped back to the present. Naruto was talking again. I mean, the way everyone else in the village looks at me, I figured it was luck I found people who were willing to be my friend at all, you know. Wrong. Ino retorted. It's not like the fox is breaking out anytime soon, right? And I don't have a problem with you. You work harder than Shikamaru and Chuji combined, and if you're on our team next time we're in the Chunin exams, we're gonna breeze right through to the finals. Wait, you mean, you want me on your team for the exams? Duh. Oh. Well. Oh, okay, I'll do my best. Naruto put up a fist, and there it was, that fire in his eyes that Ino had gotten used to seeing. You know I'll kick serious ass, you can count on me. Believe it. Yeah, but you still haven't told me why you were training out here. Ino reminded him. Something to do with the fox. Well, you see, Gaara sent me a letter recently talking about Shukaku, and, well, he apparently talks with Shukaku a lot, so I figured maybe I could try and talk to the fox, but he never wants to talk to me. He's always either pretending to be asleep or griping about how annoying I am. What do you think you'll get by talking to him? Ino asked, baffled. He tried to destroy the village, of course he's gonna be all scary and angry all the time. Well, Shukaku was like that too, but Gaara said he's been more friendly since they started talking. Naruto protested. I wondered if maybe the fox has been alone all this time and wants a friend too. It was bafflingly naive, but Ino couldn't fault the logic. And the sympathy behind it. Maybe, in a strange way, Naruto was starting to see himself in the fox. It gave her an idea. A stupid idea. An idea so hilariously stupid that her father would have grounded her for a year if he ever heard her considering an idea so stupid. What if? No, Ino, don't do it. Too stupid, too risky. What if I tried to talk to him? What? Naruto blinked. How the heck are you gonna talk to him? He's inside me. Don't you remember who I am, Naruto? Ino scoffed. I'm the beautiful and powerful heir to the Yamanaka clan. And you remember our signature technique, don't you? The mind transfer jutsu. Naruto frowned as he thought. So you're saying you want to get in my head so that you can talk to the fox? But why would you want to do that? Because I'm an idiot way in over her head. But damn it all if I'm not curious. Maybe he'll be more receptive if he talks to someone pretty like me. Ino offered with a gesture. After all, Naruto, boys like you are disasters when it comes to saying the right thing, you know. Plus, it might not even work. It was possible her jutsu wouldn't be able to breach the seal that had been put on the beast. After all, what sort of seal would it be if a Yamanaka could tear it apart from the inside? But it was worth a shot, she supposed, if only to say that it wasn't possible. And if it did work, well then she'd be able to help Naruto out. And maybe even learn something about the fox that she could hold over Sakura whenever she decided to get her butt back to Konoha. Can you hold still for about 5 seconds? Yeah sure, Ino, but are you really sure you want to do this? Nope. Ino retorted with a grin. So let's give it a go. Before Naruto could talk her out of it, Ino concentrated and made the hand sign she needed. She felt a rush of weightlessness as her mental energy was shot from her body, and time seemed to slow down, second by second, until she felt herself crash into Naruto. And then everything went dark. In a vague sense, she was aware of Naruto's body. Perhaps could even control it if she really focused. But the dark room that had grown around her was taking precedence, until eventually all she could see was the room itself, and nothing of Naruto at all. But she did hear something. Breathing. Heavy, deep breathing that seemed to fill wherever it was she had ended up. She could almost feel the air pushing against her. And then, all at once, an eye appeared before her, blinking open and glowing with unnatural chakra. Oh look! A new snack! Ino awoke back in her body with a scream. That thing had been huge. How the hell did the fourth manage to seal something like that inside of a boy? She heard a groan as Naruto came back into consciousness, and she had to do her best to hide the panic that had overtaken her body. Naruto wasn't the fox, she reminded herself. Just a container. Just Naruto who helped her keep Shikamaru and Chuji in line, Naruto who had taken a shuriken to the chest in her place on the last mission, Naruto who was her teammate. Who would still be her teammate? Did it work? Naruto asked. Everything went black for a minute, but I don't remember anything else. Ino took a deep breath before nodding. It worked. She told him. It worked. I saw it. And next time she wasn't running away. He'd said it before and he'd say it again. Girls were troublesome. Initially Shikamaru had thought it was simply a clash of personalities. The girls he knew, with perhaps the exception of one Hinata Hyuga, were boisterous, egotistical, loud, and bossy. And Shikamaru wasn't exactly one to want to boss people around himself, but really, that didn't mean others had to be so commanding, and that other usually happened to be a girl. But this, what he had in his hands right now. This was a whole new level of troublesome. And it began with, "Dear Shikamaru." He didn't know what he'd done to deserve the letter. He barely even knew Sakura, short of the ramblings that Ino tended to default to whenever anyone dared mention the sheer concept of Sasuke Uchiha. Sakura was Ino's rival in love, Ino's rival in skill, and, well, he supposed she was Naruto's old teammate, and Naruto did talk about her a lot, but that had nothing to do with him. He could count the number of times he'd spoken to her on one hand. He couldn't logically consider a friend, just an acquaintance at best, nothing to justify this stupid letter. And of course, because clearly he'd done something truly horrible in a past life to justify this, the majority of the damn letter was written in some sort of code. And damn her, now his curiosity meant he had to solve it. Only the first sentence was immediately legible. "Dear Shikamaru, for your eyes only, for the sake of our friends." Ominous, vague, and irritating. And then, oh then, came the code. Aya 2-4-13-4. Aya 1-1-4-5. Now 1-3-15-4. RIRO 4-6-11-2. The code was full of sequences like these, and it went on and on for an entire scroll. Sakura must have spent hours putting this together, and then she'd had the audacity to put it behind a code that nobody in the entire goddamn village knew. It wasn't a typical Konoha code. As far as he could tell, it wasn't anything the Umbu used either, and how would Sakura have gotten her hands on something like that anyway? For a brief moment, Shikamaru considered that it might be an IWA code, since Sakura had been supposedly training there, but there was no way he could crack an IWA code, was there? And then she had to go and say that whatever the hell she'd written in here had been for the sake of their friends. Which meant she clearly thought it was important. Which meant that Shikamaru couldn't just throw the damn letter into a ditch and forget about it. Aya. Now. RIRO. Each of the sequences began with one of those 3 character combinations. If he could just figure out what they meant. Shikamaru groaned as he trudged across the Konoha training grounds. He'd been mulling over the letter for 3 days now, trying to piece together the contents within. And he was stuck. And he was starting to kind of hate being stuck. But what he did know was that he didn't know enough about Sakura Haruno. And there were 2 immediate people in his life who did. Ino, he didn't feel like bothering on a day off, but he could always count on Naruto to be training even when the idiot was supposed to be resting. It was just a matter of finding out which training ground they were. And, oh. There was Naruto. And Ino. Oh god, they weren't making out, were they? No. No, it looked like they were doing something else. Ino was, gesturing. Was that the mind transfer jutsu? He watched as both Ino and Naruto slumped into the grass. And, Naruto didn't get up. It looked as though the jutsu had worked, so why wasn't Ino controlling Naruto? Why the hell was everyone around him so weird? Eventually, Ino awoke, shaking her head and rubbing her eyes as she pulled herself back into a sitting position. Not long after, Naruto awoke as well. They both looked at each other, and then began to talk excitedly. What the hell? Shikamaru resisted the urge to groan as he approached the 2, scroll clenched in one hand. Should I even bother asking what you're doing? Oh. Shikamaru. Ino startled. Well, Naruto, you can tell him. If you want. I mean. Nothing. Naruto shook his head. We're just screwing around. It's our day off, yeah no. Screwing around with, mind transfer jutsu. Shikamaru sighed. Alright, maybe he really shouldn't want to know, but, now he sort of had to. Is it something that's going to get one of you killed? That's a big question with a lot of answers. Ino replied with a small laugh. But it shouldn't kill us. Oh, come on, Naruto, I told you he isn't going to care, just tell him. You tell him if you're so eager. Okay. Ino brightened up. We're talking with the nine-tailed fox. There was far too much to process in that statement. Far too much. Never mind that such a statement suggested that the nine-tailed fox was sentient enough to hold a conversation, never mind the implication that the nine-tailed fox was somewhere close enough to talk to, never mind that talking with it somehow involved the... Shikamaru could have slapped himself. Of course Naruto was a goddamn Jinchuriki. He should have seen it sooner. Take the most troublesome scenario ever and multiply it by 10, and that was his life. His new teammate was a Jinchuriki. Alright, I'm going to overlook that in favor of something even more troublesome. Shikamaru answered, not failing to notice the look of apparent relief on Naruto's face. Had he been worried? It wasn't like other villages didn't have Jinchuriki. They were fairly standard for each of the big 5. And he wasn't anything like that creepy Gaara at least. Without further ado, he shoved the scroll in Naruto's direction. Do you want to tell me what the hell your old teammate is trying to tell me? Huh? She sent you a letter too. Naruto frowned as he opened the scroll. Then, he started to laugh. What the heck, Shikamaru, it's all nonsense. Sakura would never have written something so weird. Then it's probably not nonsense, Naruto. Let me look at it. For a while, the two squabbled over the letter, passing it back and forth to get a look. It was great, just great. If they didn't have any clues off the bat, this was probably a dead end. Really, what had Sakura been thinking? For the sake of our friends. They're friends. Suddenly, all at once, it clicked. Wait, give that back. Shikamaru snatched the letter from a whining Naruto, looking over the code. Hiya, now. Ino Yamanaka. Naruto Uzumaki. And Riro, who else would Sakura consider a friend in the village? Kakashi's name didn't fit, and he was fairly certain it wasn't a relative of Sakura's, it had to be a friend. Riro. Lee. Rock fucking Lee. But what the hell did the numbers mean? Ino. Naruto. Sakura's been writing you letters, right? Yeah, just not anything weird like that. Ino answered with a frown. Can I see them? What? Why? Does the word private mean anything to you? I think she wanted me to see them. Shikamaru retorted. Ino, she's written you 4 letters so far, correct? Naruto, 5 for you? And, Lee should have 8, if this pattern follows. What? She wrote Lee more than me. Both Naruto and Ino spoke in unison before looking at each other in confusion. I'm not here to listen to you two bicker. I need to see those letters. I promise I won't need them long. It took some corralling, but eventually Shikamaru had access to all of Ino and Naruto's letters. And maybe he didn't have Lee's, but there were only 26 letters to the alphabet and he could probably deduce the missing ones without going to talk with the annoying jumpsuit boy. Ino Yamanaka, letter 2, paragraph 4, word 13, 4th letter. That one was an I. Slowly, piece by piece, he was solving this damn thing. I am sorry to put you through this, Shikamaru, but I cannot be too careful. There are people in the village that you cannot trust. Do not transcribe this letter to paper. I know you are smart enough to decode it in your head. You're the smartest person I know, and that is the reason I am writing to you specifically. I need your help. There is an organization woven deep into Konoha called Root, and I have reason to believe that it is not working, as it claims, for the good of the village, but for the ambition of its leader. I believe they have kidnapped children from other villages to brainwash into perfect shinobi soldiers. I believe they perpetuated Orochimaru's research while he was still in the village. And it's possible there are many more dark secrets that I have yet to deduce. Most importantly, if they find out that I am writing to you about them, it is possible they might kill you. If you don't want to involve yourself further, I understand. Burn this letter and never mention it to anyone, I'm sure Root will leave you alone. But Shikamaru, if you have an ounce of loyalty in you, to your friends, your village, your people, you need to keep reading. And you need to help me to root out Root. Girls were so damned troublesome. A very large part of Shikamaru wanted to burn the letter and forget he ever read it. An organization called Root that worked within Konoha? Wouldn't the Hokage at least know about it? He couldn't imagine Tsunade allowing the kidnapping of foreign children for any means. He couldn't even imagine the Third allowing that. And that it was an organization that might have involved Orochimaru as well. What the fuck was Sakura trying to drag him into? And damn it all, if it was true, if any of it was true, he couldn't just sit around and let it happen. So Shikamaru made his way into the depths of the Nara forest, deeper than anyone but the clan was allowed to go. Once there, he sat down beneath the shade of his favorite tree, and began to read Sakura's letter. There was a deep wind in these woods, a howling wind that would have terrified the man if he wasn't just a little less than human himself. But Orochimaru was beyond most concepts of fear by now. He had seen the depths of the darkest jutsu, lived beyond death itself, fought powers that were far more frightening than whatever nature had to throw at him. No, rather, it was the things in the woods that fled from him, rightfully so. He moved from branch to branch as smoothly as a snake stalking prey, and the things in the woods saw him as predator. Orochimaru glanced back in time to see the glimpses of his companions behind him. Kabuto had long learned the art of moving silently, but young Sasuke had yet to quite master that balance between swift and quiet. Every now and then a branch cracked, a leaf fluttered, but he was young, of course, and still leagues ahead of where even he had been at such an age. Besides, it wasn't important now for Sasuke to be perfect, nor would it ever be. Once Sasuke's body was well and truly his, all of his decades of experience would more than suffice. For now, this was an experience meant to stretch the boy's legs, but that was merely a secondary benefit to the excursion. The real reason he was here, the real reason he'd ran across Sound Country and into the unclaimed lands of the mountains graveyard, was that he was here to make a very important transaction. Normally Orochimaru would have considered it foolish to step foot onto Akatsuki territory, but the majority of the organization had left the graveyard months ago, and Orochimaru knew he had little to fear from the member he was moving to meet, as long as he and his kept civil. Kabuto, he could trust. Sasuke, this would be a test. Teenagers were notoriously difficult, and Sasuke, under the weight of trauma, could be excruciating under the wrong circumstances. Orochimaru was, mostly positive that Itachi wasn't here, but if the Uchiha did show up. A dilemma he did not want to consider. A dilemma he hoped his contact had taken into account. The trees suddenly cleared around them, and before them stretched a vast plain, dominated by the sight of one of the most massive skeletons Orochimaru had ever seen. What the animal used to be, even he hadn't a clue. Something ancient, something old, something that predated even the eldest of his summoning snakes. At some point, when he could justify it, Orochimaru longed to get a bone sample, something he could use to try and clone one of the beasts, but for now, there wasn't exactly room in his tiny spit of a country. For now, the bones were simply a landmark, somewhere easy to find so that a meeting could take place without interference. No shinobi was brave enough to come this deep into the graveyard, not even the Taki shinobi, with all their superstition. What is it? Orochimaru heard Sasuke ask. Something too old for history to have remembered it. Kabuto explained. Judging by the structure, it appears similar to modern reptiles. It's a good thing for us that nothing that large exists anymore, don't you think, Sasuke? HN. Curiosity. Not unusual for Sasuke. When it came to combat, Sasuke tended to be a quiet, determined learner, but when it came to knowledge outside of battle, Sasuke was surprisingly studious. For a brief moment, Orochimaru felt pity for the boy. Pity that he was to be the last of his bloodline. Pity that he was doomed to become Orochimaru's own vessel. If not for the tragedy, the boy might have grown to become a shinobi that rivaled his own greatness. Ah, there he is, Lord Orochimaru. Indeed he was. In the far distance, at the base of the skeleton's massive ribcage, a figure appeared. The figure was all white, definitely unusual. Orochimaru was far more accustomed to seeing both halves of the being known as Zetsu. If only the white had been sent, what business had occupied the creature that was so much more important? It mattered little. If he backed down now, he would never get what he'd came for. Orochimaru made his way down from the massive tree branches, quietly landing on one after the other until coming to the ground in a quiet rustle of wind. Kabuto came next, and Sasuke not far behind him. He could see the white Zetsu smile as he approached, perhaps a quaint attempt to appear unearthly, but the attempt was enough to send a noticeable shiver of fear through young Sasuke. There would be questions from the boy later, he was sure of it. For now. You have brought what I asked for, I hope. One lock, as requested. The Zetsu brought for a small vial. Within, Orochimaru caught sight of a bundle of silvery hairs. Hairs that could have belonged to anyone. He had no doubt that the Zetsu could easily deceive him, just as he himself planned on deceiving the Zetsu. But the chance that this lock was what he desired. Well worth the risk. Kabuto. Orochimaru gestured to his servant, and the man stepped forward, producing a scroll and opening it for Zetsu to see. Details on the resurrection technique. Kabuto explained. As the notes mention, it will require a human sacrifice to bring back the soul of the deceased. Though I doubt that will be a problem for you. Not at all. The Zetsu replied, still grinning. Kabuto snapped the scroll shut again and moved forward in time with the Zetsu. There was a moment, a brief moment, in which everyone there tensed. A moment in which anyone could have drawn a blade or started a hand sign. A moment in which betrayal would have been as easy as breathing. The vial touched Kabuto's hand, and the scroll touched Zetsu's. Both shinobi backed away, and Orochimaru could see a small breath of relief come from Kabuto's lips. "Thank you for your business, Zetsu. Be sure to give Pain my regards. You could always come back to us, Orochimaru. There is place in our organization for your skills. As always, a tempting offer. But I have much bigger things in mind." The group separated without much further pleasantries. It was only once they were a mile from the meeting point that Orochimaru allowed himself to ease up. It had been a gamble on his end, of course, but he doubted Zetsu would immediately discover that the scroll he'd been given had been altered slightly from Orochimaru's original design, one simple symbol with an extra line through it, enough to ensure the technique wouldn't last more than an hour. It was still a useful technique, but not nearly as useful as Orochimaru's own perfected product. And that was how it should be. If he just let anyone have access to his carefully crafted techniques, well, he'd be quite the sellout. "What are those hairs?" "Something that needn't concern you, Sasuke," Orochimaru answered automatically. He reached out to take the bottle from Kabuto, examining it with a critical eye. The hairs seemed, well, they looked like hairs. Time would tell if they were truly locks of the being known as Kaguya. "Come, Sasuke. We have a long journey home, and along the way you will perfect your chakra control. I expect silence on the road back." He was a stubborn boy, but a powerful one. Soon Sasuke would be his in full. And the steps to creating his final vessel had, as of now, finally begun. Son of a shit-fucked rice ball, that hurts. Maybe next time, don't allow yourself to be cut in half during a simple bounty hunt. Eat a cock, Kakuzu. You're making it hurt on purpose. Never mind that it was always him taking the majority of the damage whenever they went on these simple hunts. In all of his years working for Akatsuki, Hayden hadn't seen the man take lethal damage once. And maybe it was his life's purpose to be a vessel for pain, but that didn't mean his partner couldn't, well, be a goddamn partner every now and then and help out beyond making some dumbass comment about Hayden's fighting style. The only useful quality the bastard had was the ability to sew Hayden back together if the worst came to it. But damn if the process didn't hurt. Hayden wistfully thought of his old home, the Jashin Enclave hidden within the depths of Yogakur. The healers there, the members of the shitty Compath, well, at least they were gentler than this. Hayden found himself longing for the easy regeneration of the Jushisai. He could just leave, not even Akatsuki knew where the Jashin Enclave was hidden. He could run home, hide away until he was forgotten, stop getting involved in this stupid, fucking mess. Hayden shook the cowardly thoughts from his head. Jashin would smite him for running away from a job like this one. At some point, once they had enough information, once they were prepared, Akatsuki would move out against the Jinhiriki. The ultimate challenge, and the ultimate destruction, right? How many shinobi alive could say they'd fought a demon host in one? Never mind, of course, that it was much more in line with his belief to destroy the Baijuyu entirely, rather than resealing it, but that was a step he could work out along the way. Jashin, for whatever reason, had set him on this path. Jashin had led Akatsuki to him, that was something that had been agreed upon by his elders. Fuck the elders, Hayden mused, but, the elders needed to be shown at least outward respect. One of the tenets of Jashinism. Tenets he had sworn to follow for such glorious gifts. Hayden winced as Kakuzu pulled the final thread through his skin. He'd need to remain still for a while, until his body regenerated, but for now, at least, he was in one piece. "Thanks," he grumbled. "Don't screw up next time," Kakuzu answered, his typical response. Hayden really hated the fucker. Kakuzu left Hayden's side to go and wrap up the body of the kunoichi Hayden had lovingly sacrificed. Off the shinobi would go to claim the bounty, leaving Hayden behind to recuperate and catch up when his leg finally worked again. It definitely gave Hayden time to think. He wondered, briefly, if the young kunoichi he'd met in Plains had really been interested in the faith, or if she'd only really been interested in the immortality. It was a rare gift, he'd been told, one that Jashin granted only to one at a time. One who exemplified the beliefs of the violent path. Until Hayden was erased from the world, he would be the only one who carried such an ability. Such was the will of Jashin. If Kakuzu or Pain or any of the other Akatsuki fuckers knew what sort of shinobi they'd been allowed onto their team, he certainly deserved a lot more fucking respect. Pinky would never obtain immortality. But Jashin could help her to get stronger, that much Hyden could guarantee. Assuming she made it all the way to the depths of U and found the hidden enclave within the mountainside. Assuming she wasn't killed on the way in. Hyden found himself rooting for her, in a way. The way she'd punched that Hiroshi guy, hard enough that he'd heard the man's jawbones crackle, it had been like beautiful, beautiful music. He could imagine her training in the steam-shrouded rooms of peace and violence. He could see her, bright-eyed, ready to kill, training as an apprentice at his side. If not for the goddamned Akatsuki. Jashin sent him to this group for a reason, Hyden reminded himself. He had heard the decree in his dreams, felt it within the power that resonated within him. Jashin wanted him here. But why? Why was it so important to be here now? Pain claimed that they were going to unite the shinobi world and save it from destroying itself. Rightfully so, Pain claimed that humanity was naturally prone to war, and that he could use strength to force the shinobi world to follow his will, and end fights before they began. Pain even had the audacity, the gall, to claim himself a god. Hyden knew better, of course. He'd met Jashin long before he'd ever so much as heard the name of Pain, and even though Pain was strong, perhaps even stronger than himself, Pain was no Jashin. Pain couldn't possibly unite the shinobi world. But somehow, through Hyden's being in Akatsuki, somehow, despite all thoughts to the contrary, Hyden would help lead the world to salvation. What a stupid, strange thought, that Jashin would insist upon the actions of a Hagashisai in order to ensure the world's salvation. Hyden was a destroyer, meant to annihilate his foes in Jashin's name, meant to ensure violence, not peace. But who was he to deny the will of his god? As Hyden tested the mobility of his legs, he began to say a silent prayer to Jashin. A prayer for guidance. A prayer for answers. A prayer for the bloody patience not to strangle Kakuzu and his 5 hearts while the man slept. If Jashin was expecting him to stick around with Akatsuki, he was going to need a lot of divine assistance. A deep, retching cough sounded through the room, and Kisame saw dark blood on the hand of Itake Uchiha. Lung disease, progressing at a rate that would kill the man within a year or two. Itake did not have long to live, and yet, refused all medical help beyond simple pills. Willpower, a stronger willpower than Kisame had ever seen in a man, was what was truly keeping the Uchiha alive. A pity. Itake was one of the few men that Kisame truly respected, the only one still alive, if he was honest with himself. To anyone else, it might have seemed strange to see the monster of the hidden mist lay a gentle hand upon Itake's back. But Kisame supposed no one would ever truly know the real him as Itake did. You're still so determined to die at your brother's hands? If you don't get help, you won't make it long enough to glimpse him, let alone convince him of a proper fight. We've discussed this before, Kisame. Back and forth, this talk usually went. Kisame tried in vain to save Itake's life, and Itake stubbornly pushed himself further and further into his own grave. If it were anyone else, Kisame would have let them die. A man who had lost the will to live was hardly a man at all. But without Itake, if he considered the world without Itake in it, Kisame had nothing left. Akatsuki, perhaps, though Kisame held no true loyalty to it. It had been a way to pass the time until his assignment to Itake, and once the bastard Uchiha had wormed his way into Kisame's heart, motives had changed. Keep Itake alive. Help him see his goals achieved. And then. If he allowed Akatsuki to dominate Konoha, would that be a stain upon Itake's memory? But was he even capable of stopping Akatsuki alone? A rock in a hard place, that was where he had ended up. Only ever loosely tied to one thing at a time. As fickle and fierce as the waves back home. Kisame, you should get something to eat. Not until you've stopped coughing. What are you going to do? Itake looked up at him, dark eyes seeming to read his very thoughts. What will you do? Itake repeated. When I am gone. You deserve more than what Akatsuki has given you. What I want does not exist. Kisame retorted. He would amuse Itake, if only for a little while. The world is full of traitors and scum, and I am the worst of the lot. What sort of home would have a use for a shinobi like me? I killed my superior. I have killed my comrades for the sake of some greater good, but what good is worth the lives of others? I have yet to see it, Itachi. I have yet to see a meaning for this life of mine. You, at the very least, will die giving purpose to your brother. I will likely die a meaningless death, one that will serve to benefit someone else only briefly before they too are overthrown. He chuckled to himself, sharp teeth scraping across each other as he did so. There is no true honesty in this world. No one truly worth following. I'm lucky enough to have found a friend, and even he will leave me soon. Kisame. I have to try. Kisame admitted. Try to give you a reason to live beyond your brother. If I don't, then I really will have lived a meaningless life. I will get further aid for myself, if you promise me something. Interesting. Itachi had never bargained before. Perhaps it was becoming too much to bear. Promise me, once I am gone, that you will look for someone worth following. This time, Kisame laughed fully, heartily. Someone worth following? Such a person likely didn't exist. Still, as he gently rubbed Itachi's back, he had to admit that he didn't have anything better to occupy himself with, once Itachi was dead. He was neutral to Akatsuki. Neutral to the world. But if Itachi asked. All right, you stubborn bastard. He answered. I'll look. I won't find anyone. But I'll look. Itachi coughed again, but despite it all, the man had a smile. Chapter 33. Second tenet of the Shinobi Neutrality Pact. All villages who henceforth sign this agreement are to be considered in alignment. The implications of such are that no village under the pact shall actively declare war, sabotage, or otherwise harm either the other villages in the pact, or the shinobi under each village's jurisdiction. If a village is suspected to have broken this tenet, unless evidence is otherwise undeniable, the village will be put to trial to determine guilt. Upon guilty verdict, the village will be suspended from alliance and subject to retaliation. Every village has a right to a trial consisting of both members of the Shinobi Neutrality Project, as well as peers from their own village and other villages within the alliance. Sakura was the only one who slept soundly at night. At first, Gaara wasn't sure if Kakashi Hatake slept at all. Despite the fact that Gaara truly did not sleep, and had been more than willing to take up permanent night watch, shifts had still been agreed upon so that Gaara would not have to be constantly alert. Still, even the slightest movement caused the Konoha Jounin's single eye to open and scan the area, even if the movement was just the falling of a leaf or a squirrel scampering across a branch. There were times, rare times, where movement wouldn't stir the man, Gaara's only clue that Kakashi was capable of sleep, but those times only came, interestingly enough, when it was Sakura's shift. Sai, in contrast, clearly tried to sleep, but was incapable of more than hour-long rests before his body began to twitch and he woke up in a state that was far more emotional than his usual blank slate. Nightmares. Gaara had seen Sakura experience them occasionally, but never nightly. Gaara had never understood why one's mind would force a person to live through horrific scenes at a time when they were supposed to be resting, but then again, there had been little in Gaara's life that unnerved him. For Sai to experience nightmares nightly, what had he been put through? Underroot? Was Konoha's underground truly so terrifying, so brutal? Gaara wondered if that was why Kakashi didn't sleep. When Gaara considered nightmares, well, he was grateful that he couldn't experience them himself. The woods were louder at night than he had expected. Insects, rodents, and nocturnal birds all chattered and chirped, and the wind on the mountain whistled through the spindly leaves of the trees around them. As far as he knew, they were still in IWA territory, but had yet to come across any patrols or any merchants traveling the main road. The only other sign of sentient life had been the chakra signature Sakura had picked up on days before, and even that had yet to reveal itself again. A man whose skin was black and white, with strange, plant-like growths, it sounded more like a nightmare than an actual real being. Amazing, then, that Sakura could sleep so soundly. Was it a testament to her trust in him? With others around, Gaara found himself too embarrassed to ask. Just a matter of time, he reminded himself, before Sai and Kakashi would return to Konoha, and it would be just the two of them again. It was Kakashi's shift now, so Gaara allowed himself to stand up and stretch his legs. Kakashi, he trusted more than Sai, which meant during his shift he could wander the immediate area to keep himself from getting stiff and scout for anything that Kakashi might miss. On top of that, Gaara could continue to familiarize himself with forest environments, which were still strange compared to the flat, rocky deserts he had gotten used to navigating. Trees, being living things, exuded a very small amount of natural chakra that made it more difficult for his feet to grip onto, and unlike stone they swayed and buckled with wind and weight. Leaves could fall and create noise with the tiniest of touches, an animal could alarm if you came too close to its nest. All these things, Gaara had to learn, things that other shinobi had grown up learning and taken somewhat for granted. An hour passed as Gaara practiced stepping lightly from branch to branch, pine needles sticking to his clothes and his hair. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The animal was small, the size of the cats he would often see running around the streets of Iwa, but unlike cats, this animal was stockier, with a fat tail and striped markings on its face. It was near silent as it pawed its way closer to the fire his comrades slept around, snuffling at the ground as it walked. Dangerous? Probably not. Gaara doubted the animal was some sort of predator that could harm Sakura, and if it had been, Kakashi would have killed it in a heartbeat. He briefly saw the Jounin look its way before the man turned back to that strange, orange book of his. No, the animal was not a threat, but it was very curious, to come so close to people without fear of death. In a strange way, the animal looked familiar. Had he seen such markings before? It's a tanuki, brat, it better damn well look familiar. A tanuki, so that was what it was. Gaara had heard the term used to describe shukaku, knew vaguely that the animals existed, but he'd never seen one before. How was it, he wondered, that shukaku came to be in the desert, if other tanuki lived out here in the woods? If the animal was so curious, would it be friendly? Gaara had become admittedly fond of the cats he would sometimes run across in Iwa, understanding, after a time, why others valued the animals as pets. If this tanuki was calm enough, perhaps he could. He heard a snort inside his mind from Shukaku. So, probably not. But Gaara had nothing better to do this late at night, and even if the animal did try to attack him, there would be no fangs or claws that could break through the sand he kept over his skin. As Gaara made his way down the tree and towards the fire, the animal continued to snuffle about, eventually making its way towards Sakura's feet. It nibbled briefly at one of her shoes before moving on, looking for food, Gaara deduced. Food that they could probably spare. He reached into one of his pouches, tearing off a tiny piece of jerky as he approached the tanuki. Eventually, the tanuki caught sight of him, and it let out a small hiss as he came near. Gaara simply crouched down and held out the jerky. He'd found cats liked it best when he was quiet and low, and after a moment, it seemed, the tanuki thought similarly. It took several minutes before the tanuki was confident enough to come close, grabbing the jerky from Gaara's hands with a quick, harsh movement before running off into the grass nearby. But it took the meat, and out of the corner of his eyes, Gaara saw what looked like a smile pass across Kakashi's masked face. As they walked the next day, Gaara saw the animal follow them. You gave it food. Shukaku lamented. Now it'll never leave us alone. Gaara didn't see a problem with that. Each night the tanuki would come shuffling into their camp, and Gaara would offer it a small bit of his rations. He could go without a small bit of dinner, he decided, if that meant his new small friend would stick around for a little bit longer. What he did not expect was, after several nights had passed, for the tanuki to start bringing friends. Sometimes just one. Sometimes several. But each night Gaara found himself surrounded by several furry friends who all were more than eager to share in the jerky bounty that Gaara offered. Greedy little brats. Shukaku commented. Tanuki were a formidable race, but if this is what they have become. Gaara wondered if Shukaku had taken on the form of a tanuki before or after meeting the animals. As a being of pure chakra, he could look like anything, Gaara figured, and yet, he'd chosen this form. So one night, during a meditation, Gaara decided to ask. I didn't choose this form. Shukaku admitted, huffing as he spoke. None of my brethren did. We simply were. I theorized that the energy that makes up my being resonates with the energy tanuki carry, though, The tiny brats you've been feeding barely have any chakra at all. So there are Tanuki that do have chakra? Do people summon them? Not for years. Decades. Not since I was sealed away. Tanuki can hold a hell of a grudge, and they considered me one of their own. They thought humans were stupid enough before, but after putting me into a tea kettle, they washed their hands of humanity entirely. Shikaku chuckled. Kind of touching, now that I think about it. Makes me wonder what they've been up to all these years. As the nights slowly passed, Gaara wondered if one day that could change. He and Shikaku had been on much better terms since he'd begun to dedicate time to talk with the beast, so maybe, if he and Shikaku became close, maybe he could see these strong Tanuki one day. A far-off goal, maybe, but the small ones in the woods had warmed up to him fast enough. It was one particular night, as a Tanuki was tugging a piece of jerky from his fingers, that things suddenly changed. All at once, the Tanuki froze, dropping the jerky and turning its head towards the woods nearby. Then, without much hesitation, it ran into the woods, leaving the food behind. Unusual behavior. It was Kakashi's shift again, and Gaara found himself curious, so he began to walk in the direction that Tanuki ran off to. It was dark, but the moon was mostly full, and Gaara had always had a knack for night vision. What was even stranger was that it seemed as though the Tanuki was wanting him to follow. It would scamper off out of sight, but then wait until Gaara caught up before scampering off again. It went far, almost too far for Gaara to want to continue following, until eventually he saw further movement in the forest beyond. Out of instinct, Gaara leapt into the tree next to him, hoping the pine needles would be enough to cover him. His instincts were correct. There was a person in the woods. Gaara watched as the Tanuki confronted the person, growling and hissing in a manner that was unusual for the animal. It was only after a few seconds of looking when Gaara realized that the person had killed another Tanuki, and had gotten halfway through skinning it before Gaara and his furry friend had arrived. Had the Tanuki sensed its companion's death? It seemed angry at this person who had covered all of their identifying features with cloth and a white mask. There were slits for their eyes, but nothing else, not like Sai's mask which had markings and stripes. Nothing distinguishing on their clothes, no headband indicating a village, nothing. But the person pushed away the hissing Tanuki with a harsh kick, and suddenly in Gaara's mind the person was an enemy. His sand poured out from the scroll on his back, slinking towards the person until it was close enough to wrap around their ankles and pull them quickly to the ground. The person struggled for a brief moment before disappearing into a puff of smoke. A clone. Damn it all. It would be smart to go for backup, but Gaara wasn't sure if the person knew about the existence of his comrades, and the last thing he wanted to do was lead a hostile stranger to Sakura. The Tanuki had gotten up again, and Gaara noted with glee that the animal had turned to face a certain part of the woods, fur up and still hissing angrily. Aha! His furry friend would be helpful after all. Gaara pushed himself from his hiding spot, now with a new objective in mind. Capture the enemy, figure out why a shinobi was out here in the woods alone. As he lunged forward, several kunao streaked towards him with pinpoint accuracy, deflected on time only due to the speed of his protective sand. A test throw, by the look of things, as Gaara caught sight of the shinobi turning to run once they realized their weapons were useless. Running, Gaara realized, right towards his camp. Better kill them quick, brat. No, not kill. But definitely capture. Gaara sent out his sand ahead of him, lashing at the shinobi's legs to try and bring him down. He tripped the shinobi once, and before he could move in for the capture, the Tanuki leapt in out of nowhere, biting down on the shinobi's wrist. Gaara heard the shinobi curse aloud, and that hesitation was all he needed to wrap his sand around the shinobi's body and restrain them. For a moment, there was more struggling. Then, before Gaara could stop the shinobi, they pulled up their mask and shoved something into their mouth. Gaara heard choking, and saw something bubble in their mouth, and then the shinobi lay dead. Gaara and Shikaku's thoughts resonated in one single line. What the fuck just happened? Gaara brought the body back to camp, dropping it on the ground next to Kakashi, who looked, if anything, even more exhausted once he caught sight of it. He put a finger to his lips before gesturing for Gaara to follow him out of sight of their companions. I've been expecting this, Kakashi admitted as he began to examine the body. After a moment, he forced the mouth open, pulling the tongue out so Gaara could see. Though it was swollen from death, and the effect of whatever the person had swallowed, there was a very clear series of black marks on the tongue. Look familiar. Sai has those markings. Gaara answered. A root agent. Yes, though he'll have tried to make damn sure we can't prove it. Those markings will fade away in about an hour, now that he's dead. But why? Gaara demanded. We already have a root agent in our midst. Why is he here? And why kill himself? Because we don't actually have a root agent in our midst. Kakashi countered. About a month ago, Sai was ordered home. He hasn't responded to his order. As far as Root's leader is concerned, that's treason. Quite frankly, I'm amazed it took them this long to find us. They're here to kill Sai. Gaara deduced, frowning. And what of Sakura and I? You? No idea. But there will be more of them. Danzo isn't one to take a loss lightly. He'll try and catch us off guard a few times before he determines it's not worth the effort. Why haven't you told us before? Gaara turned his frown to Kakashi. This could mean life or death for Sakura. We needed heavier guard than just a simple night watch. I got lucky with this one, who knows how many more are out there. You're right. We do need to be more on our guard. But, Kakashi sighed. I was hoping Sai would just come out and tell us. I'm unsure why he's kept it to himself. When I confronted him, he denied it completely. The two were silent for a moment as Kakashi began to rummage through the shinobi's things. Kunao, shuriken, some traps, but nothing more. Nothing damning, as Kakashi had put it. One more chance. Gaara decided. Sai gets one more chance to come clean. Before the next round of Root tries to kill him again. Otherwise, I'll tell Sakura myself. Ah. Kakashi gave Gaara a smile. Well, I can't say I disapprove of that. But Gaara, Kakashi hesitated. Unusual, for him. Just, be gentle with Sai. Root is a nightmare. If anything, you probably can understand him better than most, what it's like to be viewed as something less than human. You say that like you know it. I was part of Root, once. Kakashi admitted. Fortunately, I got some sense knocked into me before I fell in too deep. I got lucky. Not everyone gets second chances like that. No, Gaara admitted. Not everyone does. But he'd gotten a second chance. Naruto had knocked that sense into him, and now he was better. Not maniacal, not bloodthirsty, he had friends. He had a purpose. Was Sai, in the same place he had been? Thinking himself hopelessly entrenched in a bloody future, unable to break free, no love, no friendship. Sakura had reached out to him, tried to bring him into the group. In a way, she had already been doing for Sai what needed to be done. And here Gaara had been, trying to push him away out of jealousy. He was a selfish idiot. Gaara buried the body. For now, Sai would be safe. Maybe he just needed time away from the influence of Root to realize that there were better paths, better options. And maybe, this time, maybe Gaara would try to reach out too. As he and Kakashi made their way back to the fire, the tanuki was sitting there waiting for him, licking its paw to cover a small cut it had gotten in the scrap. As Gaara approached, it went to his side, rubbing its head against his leg in an affectionate manner. Definitely a friend. It had just taken patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen. The tanuki had led him to the Root shinobi. The friendship, beyond the simple goal of shared affection, had already proven worthwhile. He'd just have to show Sai. Somehow. Some way. Friendship was worth it. Chapter 34, Third Tenet of the Shinobi Neutrality Pact. The villages of the pact will stand as one. Any threat by outside force on one village is a threat on all. Villages in the alliance will deal with hostile forces together, in order to preserve the alliance as a whole. It was official. Judging by the landmarks and how long they'd been traveling, Sakura had officially left Earth Country and crossed the border into the stretch of land owned by Taki Shinobi. The land itself wasn't a country, not like other places she'd been to in the past, but rather a vast forest that was guarded solely by Takigakuer. If there were other towns within the border, they were too small to show up on common maps. Very few outsiders traveled to Taki. By the sound of things, there was simply very little reason to. Taki shinobi were extremely protective of their village, and most that had attempted to invade the land in the past had been repelled by what Sakura had read to be extremely powerful shinobi. Even her own map only had a crude estimate for where the location of the village was. Sakura just hoped they'd run into a patrol and be able to explain the situation before it escalated into a fight. IWA had been known for being fairly protective, and she'd managed to win them over, regardless of the fact that it had been due to luck and fortuitous timing. Maybe luck would keep being on their side now. There were 3 things she needed to address in Taki. First and foremost was bringing up the Neutrality Pact. She had literally no idea what Taki would think of such a venture, but she'd hoped, given shinobi history, that they would look at the idea favorably. The only past treaty that was even remotely comparable in scope to what she was attempting had been made back at the founding of the villages, when Hashirama Senju had attempted to unite the 5 major villages and stop the widespread war. Villages like Taki had supposedly existed back then, but had been considered too small to consider in such a treaty. By including them now, Taki would be considered on equal footing with villages like Iwa and Konoha. It was one of the reasons Plains had signed on to the agreement so readily. Such an agreement was potentially groundbreaking for a small village with little continental influence. Second, there was a jinhiriki in Taki. The only village outside the major 5 to have one. Sakura had to wonder if part of the reason they were so efficient in repelling invaders was due to the power of their Baijuya. Regardless, Gaara had done well with making friends with the Iwa jinhiriki, so she hoped he might be able to work his magic with the next one. Finally, there was the matter of the Akatsuki member Kakuzu. She really only had a name and rumors. During her time in Iwa she had investigated the man that she had seen in Plains, and all she had managed to learn was that he was a prolific bounty hunter who wore a slashed takigaku or headband. Taki was the only lead she had when it came to finding out what such a shinobi was capable of, and in turn, it was possible that Kakuzu was the most major threat to them and their jinhiriki, given that he no doubt had knowledge of village secrets. 3 goals. That was what she had to focus on. Of course that was rather hard when her traveling companions were acting so damn odd. Kakashi had always kind of acted like he had several secrets up his sleeves. She was used to his unnaturally laid-back attitude and the fact that he always seemed to know more than he let on. So really, he was the most easy to ignore amidst the strangeness. Sai, well, he'd always been a bit strange, that much was true. Sakura had chalked it up to the nature of his upbringing under Root. But even now, as he put on his usual fake smile and attempted to join in on her small talk, Sakura couldn't help but notice that he seemed distracted. Constantly looking left and right, up and down, as though he was expecting something to come jumping out of a tree at any minute. Paranoid, yes, that was the way to describe it. Sai was acting paranoid, had been acting paranoid since the moment they'd left Iwa, and it was making Sakura paranoid. It was bad enough that she'd seen that strange plant-looking man on their way down the mountain, but now Sakura was starting to look everywhere too, sending off her sensing jutsu every few minutes and even occasionally looking around for anything resembling an enemy. She didn't like being this jumpy. Sai hadn't been like this before Iwa, so what had changed? And how could she possibly breach the subject without sounding weird? She would have brought it up with Gaara, but the kicker was that he was acting distracted too. At first, Sakura thought it was due to him suddenly gaining a new furry companion. She liked the tanuki well enough, and she certainly wasn't going to deny the presence of a cute animal in their group. Though she did occasionally question how on earth Gaara had gotten it to follow them. But after a while she realized that he was starting to act somewhat paranoid too. She could almost pinpoint the moment his demeanor shifted. One night, he was normal. The next night, he barely left her side. On top of that, he was always looking at Sai, like he was expecting something to happen that simply hadn't yet. Everyone was acting weird and Sakura was getting tired of it. And since her companions wouldn't come out and tell her what was going on, Sakura found she only really had one way to vent. Boys. Sakura huffed to herself quietly as she ran her hands through the tanuki's soft fur. It was her turn to keep watch, and even with Gaara awake, she'd found the right volume to talk without him being able to hear. I swear, they think girls like us are too fragile to handle a problem when it comes up, but they're incapable of keeping it from us either. You'd think they'd know by now it's better to talk it out. Isn't that right, Emmy? The tanuki looked up at her with adorable brown eyes. Sakura was pretty sure it was a girl, but, well, maybe she just wanted it to be a girl. Back at Konoha, at least she'd had Ino to talk to whenever the boys had gotten rowdy. Here she just had Emmy. She'd picked out the name. Gaara had seemed to like it well enough. The stupid thing is, they're probably just trying to protect me from whatever drama they've cooked up behind my back. Sakura lamented, using both her hands to cup the tanuki's fluffy cheeks. I swear, it's like when Naruto and Sasuke started fighting, you know? Like, really fighting. They'd be all mopey around each other but they'd never talk about it or anything like that. And I think Kakashi tries to keep me out of it because he has some weird idea that I still need to be protected from the world. Sakura sighed. And then she frowned, determination coming to her face. What do you think, Emmy? Am I a kunoichi or not? Emmy blinked at her, a sloppy little grin coming to her face. That's right. Sakura agreed. It was time to investigate. Sakura stood up, taking the tanuki into her arms as she began to walk away from the camp. It was time to check the perimeter, something she typically did on watch anyway. Knowing Gaara, who never slept, he would follow her on the perimeter check to make sure she was safe. This was key to her plan. She walked until she was just barely out of hearing range of the camp. She could still see the light of the fire, and to be honest she was fairly certain that even with her gone, nobody would be able to get a jump on a root agent in a Konoha Jounin anyway. Her keeping watch was somewhat of a formality. She stopped at a large tree, looking as though she was examining it until Gaara came close enough. Then, she swiveled around, tanuki in one arm, accusatory hand pointing with the other. All right, Gaara. Spill it. What the hell is going on? Gaara blinked, his eyes widening in surprise. I don't know what you mean. He answered. Stone-faced, of course. If anyone was good at hiding emotions, it was Gaara, for the most part. But Sakura had been traveling with the boy for a while, and she could see what others couldn't. The quick downward glance, he was feeling guilty. The subtle shift in his stance, a slightly defensive posture. To Sakura, he was like an open book. You think I haven't noticed everything? Sakura retorted angrily. Sai's walking around like a bunny about to sprint off if anything so much as looks at him funny. You're acting paranoid as fuck, and that means a lot coming from Mr. Ultimate Defense. And Kakashi's got that look like he knows something and doesn't want to tell me. So you're gonna tell me, right? Sakura takes a deep breath, and then puts on her most sweetest begging face, one she practiced in front of the mirror for years for when she wanted to use it to ask Sasuke out on dates. You're gonna tell me because you're my best friend, right? Gaara looked even more surprised at this, and there was something of a sheepish look on his face as he replied. I'm your best friend. Duh. Sakura rolled her eyes. I mean, you left your village to come along with me. You've been with me all this time. Do you honestly think you're not best friend material at this point? I mean, I don't really know how it works. There's not a way it works, you're a best friend or you're not. It's easy. And you're distracting me from my question. Sakura pointed a finger again. Gaara, I need to know what's going on. Gaara remained quiet for a moment. This time, Sakura can tell, he's thinking, maybe thinking of the best way to approach whatever's going on. I can't be the one to tell you. Gaara finally admitted. I would like to tell you, but I promised I'd give one more chance before I did. One more chance. Sakura thought on this for a moment. It's very likely Gaara's referring to Sai, unless somehow Gaara found Kakashi doing something odd. For a brief moment Sakura wondered if Gaara and Sai managed to peek at one of Kakashi's books. She'd looked at one of the ones she found at a bookstore once, never again. Never again. Sai, it probably is. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how detrimental is this secret going to be to our mission? Gaara thought aloud, looking uncharacteristically worried. Well, it's not like I won't be able to protect you. So, maybe, a 1. Sakura's eyes narrowed. On a scale of 1 to 10, how detrimental is this secret to the safety of other members of our party? It might be a 10. Sakura groaned, rolling her eyes as she turned around to gently knock her head against the branch of the tree behind her. You're telling me that you guys have been holding a 10 behind my back without bothering to tell me? And you thought I wouldn't find out? Son of a bitch. I'm sorry, Sakura heard Gaara's timid voice from behind her. But if he isn't the one to tell you, then he isn't going to learn. It's Sai, you saw how much work it took to get a freaking name out of him. Am I still your best friend? Sakura turned around. Gaara looked distressed, and damn it all if she wasn't feeling sorry for him. She set down Emi so she could go put a hand on his shoulder. Of course you're still my best friend, I'm not really mad at you. It's just, we really don't need this right now. We're in potentially hostile territory at the moment, we don't know how Taki is going to react to us coming, and the last thing we need is whatever drama Sai's dragged with him to interfere with us getting this treaty signed. If we come in bringing baggage, Taki might turn us away without a second thought. I don't know. A voice sounded from the tree above her. Some of us kinda like the drama. Sakura and Gaara both looked up. Sitting in on a branch, kicking her legs back and forth in a calm manner, was a girl about their age. She had a shock of blue hair, and wore a distinct Taki headband around her upper arm. She grinned, her orange eyes squinting somewhat as she looked down at them. Hiya. Sakura sighed. It was going to be that kind of night, wasn't it? The girl's name was Fu, and that was all that Sakura could get out of her. Which was strange, because the girl couldn't seem to stop talking. It's been a really long time since we had visitors at all. Fu spoke, seemingly oblivious to the hostile stares that were coming at her from the others. Not that I blame people. The last time a group of bandits passed through, they got really close to the village, so Kigon put water shuriken straight through their brains. It was super gross. She made a gesture with her hands, and then made a sound like something getting squished. Splosh. All over the rocks. I think one of them survived though, because every now and then we hear a merchant mention it when we watched them skim the border. All 3 of her companions were looking at Fu with slight disbelief. Here she was, waltzing into their camp in the dead of night, and now she was sitting at their fire and chatting like it was completely natural. So are you going to attack us, or are you going to keep us up all night? Sai questioned. Yes, I think we'd all like to know the situation. Kakashi added. Oh, me? I felt a strange chakra, so I came to investigate, that's all. Like I said, we don't usually get visitors. And we especially don't see shinobi. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen other shinobi. Fu admitted with a frown. Just bandits and robbers and other ilk that think our forest is their stomping ground. Are you guys planning on invading? I thought I heard Pinky mention a treaty. Pinky, Sakura heard Sai mutter. She had the feeling she'd just gotten a new nickname. My name's Sakura. She insisted, hoping to nip things in the bud. And yes, I'm here with a treaty. It's a part of the Shinobi Neutrality Project. I'm trying to draft up a potential alliance between the hidden villages, so we've come to Taki in peace to see if they would be interested in joining. Oh. Probably not. Fu admitted, putting a finger to her chin as she thought. We don't really like strangers. And you guys have tried to invade in the past, so you'll probably try to do it again. Well, under the treaty dash. Besides, you don't even know why you want to ally with us. Sakura blinked, looking back and forth to each of her companions. I mean, it's the same reason we want all of the villages, I would imagine. We're not prioritizing any village above any other. That's kind of the point. Wrong. Fu held up a finger to Sakura, shaking it back and forth. Wrong, wrong. You don't know it, but we're the most important village of them all. Do you want to know why? Yes. Then I'll tell you. Fu answered with a grin. Takigakuer is the most important village in the world, and that's because, she leaned in, almost conspiratorial-like. We keep the rest of the world safe from the demons. Sakura stared at Fu for a moment, processing what she said, before looking to Gaara, to Sai, to Kakashi. For that moment, They all looked equally confused. Then, it hit Sakura all at once. Tall, weird plant-looking men. Fia gasped. You've seen one? Where? That means one got across the border. Crap. She stood up, looking around desperately for a moment before turning back to Sakura. All right, Pinky. You're coming with me. Shivuki needs to see you immediately. Chapter 35. Fourth tenet of the Shinobi Neutrality Pact. All official ambassadors to the pact will be unaligned with any specific village in the pact. All actions and agreements performed by ambassadors will be done without bias. If an ambassador is suspected to have acted with bias, they will be investigated by both village delegates and fellow ambassadors. Upon proof of biased action, the ambassador will be subject to punishment, potentially including dismissal from their position and revokement of any agreements known to have been influenced by said bias. How many of those demons has your village seen so far? Hundreds, over the years. It's like there's no end to them. We're just lucky that they trickle in small groups. If 100 tried to breach all at once, there's no way we could contain them. Sakura listened closely while she ran next to Fia, grateful for the familiar style of tree jumping that she had gotten used to during her time in Konoha. Iwa's pine trees had been ill-suited for travel, their prickly leaves were painful to push through, and their branches too close together. Taki trees were far more similar to the monsters that dotted the Konoha landscapes, which meant it was easy for Sakura to keep pace and hear what Fia had to say. Demons, that was the only term Fia had to describe the beings that regularly tried to breach through Taki's borders. Borders, Sakura had come to realize, that stretched a bit further than her past sources agreed upon. Even if it wasn't recognized by other villages, Taki shinobi patrolled not only Taki land, but the entire strip around the mountain's graveyard. It was there, Fia claimed, that the demons were born. It was there they regularly approached from. But every time Taki had sent in shinobi to try and clear the nest, to figure out how they were being born and how to stop them, none ever returned. Supposedly these demons had been around since before the founding of the hidden villages. It was this knowledge, and the dismissal of this knowledge, that had led to Taki denying alliance with any other village in the past. Taki was fighting a centuries-long war, Fia had told her. A war that nobody else acknowledged, let alone tried to assist in. And Sakura couldn't help but be baffled by the fact that this information had existed for so long, and not a single village had ever once thought to look into it further. It was so strange as to be suspicious, and that just meant another mystery on the long list of mysteries that Sakura had to keep track of, damn it all. But there was a connection, at the very least, a connection that unfortunately led to even more questions. The being that Sakura had seen up on the Iwa mountains was technically a demon, but not one of the ones that Fia was referring to. They referred to that demon as Zetsu, something similar in appearance to the other demons, but far more elusive and far less combative. This demon, Fia claimed, was seen only rarely, and after all this time no one had been able to capture him, or even get close to landing a hit. All they had was a name they weren't even sure how they managed to obtain. But what they did know with a fair amount of certainty was that, as of late, all sightings of the Zetsu demon had described him as wearing a black robe with red clouds. Akatsuki was hunting demons, through their supposed pursuit of Jinhiriki. Fitting, then, that they had recruited a demon to their team. Akatsuki supposedly had 9 members, so that, along with previous information and the knowledge of the 2 Sakura had met in Plains, meant that she had names for at least 5 of the 9. The demons that Taki repelled were different than Zetsu in that they were actively antagonistic to anyone they encountered, and strong enough to be a problem to anyone they encountered. To start, they were resilient. Jutsu that were lethal to humans could be shrugged off by a demon. On top of that, if they managed to get their hands on their attacker, they could absorb their chakra, and even start to take on aspects of the person they absorbed the chakra from. Taki had learned early on that they were capable of mimicking someone they were allowed to fully absorb. A powerful blank slate that could infiltrate anywhere if given the chance. That could already be infiltrating anywhere, if there were some that Taki'd happened to miss. This was a problem. This had been a problem. And Sakura made a vow right then and there that it wouldn't be a problem anymore. This was exactly the kind of problem that the Neutrality Project was made for. Konoha, Oto, and Taki all bordered the mountain's graveyard, If she could get all three to agree to the project, she could get them to all work in tandem to figure this problem out. Maybe if all three worked together, they could find the demon nest and root it out. Taki, of course, was already tackling this problem directly, and Sakura knew for a fact that Konoha would likely be more than willing to help out, especially if Kakashi was here to see the problem firsthand. Oto, however. Sakura had already been dreading trying to convince Orochimaru to join a village alliance. She was already worried enough about Suna and Konoha even considering allowing a village founded by the man into the pact. Orochimaru had killed both their Kage, declared war on Konoha, manipulated Suna. It wasn't something a village could easily move past. And it was a problem Sakura, at some point, would have to address. And now, with this new problem stacking on top of it, Sakura reached up, absent-mindedly holding onto the amulet of Jashin around her neck. Maybe it was stupid, but she felt like she needed divine influence to sort this shit show out. Are you sure Konoha has no record of anything like this? Sakura looked back at Kakashi. Not a single hint of any weird white-skinned person who's attacked in the past. Konoha borders the graveyard. I find it a bit hard to believe we've never even seen anything. It's because we're just that good. Few answered before Kakashi could speak. We've been keeping all you wimpy shinobi safe by manning the front lines. No, there's nothing in any of our records about this. Kakashi retorted, his one eye narrowing in what Sakura had learned to be annoyance. Quite frankly, if Sakura hadn't sensed that strange chakra a few days ago, I don't think I would have believed you. It seems very far-fetched. Sai commented. Are you sure your whole village hasn't been attacking bears this entire time? Fu didn't respond at first, she simply raised her middle finger at Sai while they ran. Sakura wondered if Sai even knew what the gesture meant. Idiot. Just because you haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it isn't true. But if you really doubt me, you can go run into the graveyard and see for yourself. We are not running into the graveyard. Sakura groaned, rolling her eyes. I am already on a tight schedule with this treaty, and we already have enough problems with Akatsuki looming over our heads. I don't want to risk death just to prove a point. But we are going to need proof if the other villages are going to believe us. Sai argued. An alliance is one thing. An alliance with the stipulation of added protection for a demon patrol is far harder to justify. And Sai was right. But how was Sakura going to get proof? She'd barely managed a glimpse of Zetsu, and she'd only managed that because Fu came to a screeching halt, causing Sakura to nearly fall off a branch to stop with her. Behind her, she heard her three male companions skid to a stop as well. Fu, what's going on? Fu put a finger to her lips. Then, to Sakura's surprise, she made a series of familiar hand signs. That was the sequence for her sensing jutsu. There were a couple extra signs at the end of the sequence, but up until that point the sequence had been identical. A more advanced version? Sakura briefly wondered if the scroll she'd filched had even belonged to Konoha at all. Maybe it had been a Taki scroll, pillaged in the early years of war. But that thought didn't matter now. Mimicking Fu, Sakura went through her own sequence of hand signs, sending out a sensing pulse. 1, 2, 3, 8 signatures, about 200 feet away from their location. And each of those signatures had that strange, hollow energy to their chakra that she had sensed from Zetsu. You want your proof, Sai? Sakura said in a low whisper. I think timing's on our side, because we can get proof right now. Demons? Gaara asked, moving closer to her side. Demons. Fu answered with a nod. But, I'll be dealing with them. You four are going to stay here and not move until I come back. What? Sakura protested. Fu, we can help you. Do you really want to face 8 of those on your own? It's not about that. Fu replied. All at once, Sakura noticed that the girl looked nervous. Just, if you're really serious about making an alliance, you'll stay here and not follow me, all right? She doesn't want you to see her village's techniques. Sai piped up. An alliance is a good cover story for having an easy infiltration into Taki. For all she knows, we're really just here to steal village secrets. Oh. Another valid point, Sakura considered. But still, was it really alright to let this girl handle 8 enemies on her own? If you're sure you can handle it, phew, we'll wait here. To her surprise, Fia gave her a smile. I'm not like you guys. I'm the strongest kunoichi there ever was. So don't you go around doubting me, alright? I'll kick their asses and bring you back one of them so you can see the proof for yourself. She held her hand in a thumbs-up gesture, then made to turn around. Then, suddenly, Gaara stepped forward, gently taking Fia by the hand to hold her back. That's not the reason, is it? He asked softly. Hey, let go. This is serious. Fia pulled away with a frown. And whatever you think you know dash. It's okay. Gaara insisted. I'm like you. Fia's eyes widened, and all at once Sakura understood. She'd known Taki had a Jinhiriki, and now she knew that they'd been lucky enough that the very first shinobi they'd come across was that Jinhiriki. This had been about keeping village secrets, but not just mere techniques. Sakura knew that Jinhiriki had been kidnapped in the past so that other villages could gain control of their Baijuya. Baijuya were a source of village power. Now that they knew, now that the secret was out, that information could be valuable in the wrong hands. Sakura hoped beyond hope that the presence of a Jinhiriki in their own group would be enough to convince Fia that they weren't a danger. I didn't hear that. Sakura spoke up, grabbing Gaara by the back of his shirt and pulling him back several steps. And you didn't say it. And you two didn't hear it either. Sakura turned to point at Kakashi and Sai. Especially you. Sakura emphasized, jabbing her finger again in Sai's direction. And if I find you writing anything about this to Root later, I will give Fia your head on a platter myself. We are here to invite Taki into an alliance, not put their village in further jeopardy. Right. Kakashi held up his hands in defense. Not a word. Sai was quiet, which was worrying. This was absolutely the sort of information Root would want to know, and Sakura wasn't quite sure she could prevent Sai from sending that information out. All that on top of what Gaara had mentioned to her earlier, Sakura didn't know what to do with Sai yet. But right now, the most important thing was taking care of demons. Sakura turned around to face Gaara again before lightly rapping her fist against his forehead. You need to be more careful. She lectured. I know you're excited to meet someone like you, but you have to think about the consequences of that information, okay? Okay. Gaara nodded, looking uncharacteristically sheepish. Now, since we've all accidentally heard this information that we will definitely not be discussing further, I will ask again. Fia, would you like our help? Fia's eyes were still wide, but after a moment her expression steeled and she gave the group a nod. Alright Pinky, I'll let you help. All at once, her expression changed to that of a mischievous grin, and the girl reached out to poke Sakura's forehead. But only because you're cute, you got that. Sakura turned beet red at the comment, sputtering slightly, but before she could retort, Fia had already begun to move. When Sakura first caught sight of the demons, she realized all at once that this was going to be her first real fight since training under Oniki, and for a brief moment her nerves overtook her. The last real tussle she'd gotten herself into had ended with her getting stabbed twice, not to mention the brush with Akatsuki and the whole plane's Civil War aspects. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't just playing around with jutsu she'd scraped up and barely learned. She was Sakura Harano, lead ambassador for the Shinobi Neutrality Project, and student of the 3rd Tsuchikage. This fight wasn't going to be like any of the ones before. The demons were exactly like Fia had described, white-skinned, humanoid but somehow inhuman in how they moved, how they looked, how they snarled as they realized that they were being approached. Even that, for a second, was enough to make Sakura hesitate. But Fia charged in regardless, no hesitation, and if a girl like Fia could be so brave, so could she. Fia had already charged in first, and for good reason. With a couple of quick hand signs, Fia breathed out a cloud of glittering dust, covering each of the demons. It appeared to blind them, causing each of them to come to a halt as they scratched at their eyes. A damn good distraction. Then, Sakura saw what she could only describe as chakra begin to form around Fia's body, eventually coalescing into long strips on her back. Wings? Considering that Gaara had gone through radical transformations in the past with the energy of Shukaku, it wasn't completely surprising to see this. In fact, Sakura had to admit, it was kind of cool. Fuse chakra wings were allowing her to hover, which would give her a tactical advantage in the fight and damn it all, now Sakura didn't want to be shown up. Gaara, you've got defense. She called out, letting herself fall back into the routine of her past sparring drills. Sai, get up in the air and don't let any of them get past us. Kakashi, she hesitated, looking to her old mentor guiltily. Well, I guess I shouldn't be ordering you and Sai around. You and I have a fence. Kakashi finished for her, smiling through his mask. Let's go, Sakura. Sakura felt relief, and then determination. Quickly, she flew through a series of hand signs before slamming both of her fists to the ground. She felt earth chakra flow over her hands, pulling dirt and rock with it until both of her fists were encased in a solid layer. As she did this, she saw Kakashi fly over her, already engaging with one of them. Behind her, Sai had drawn out a large bird, bringing the creature to life in a splash beneath him. And, as always, Gaara was there by her side, sand already flowing out from his scroll, ready to protect her. She wasn't alone. She was stronger. She could do this. She pushed Chakra to her feet and let herself leap forward, slamming her right fist into one of the demon's face. She felt the blow connect, and saw the face distort with the power of her blow, but even as the demon staggered, it didn't fall. Fear hadn't been wrong. Sakura had broken rock with her punches before, and this thing was still standing. She would have to get a bit more creative. The demon lashed out at her in response, and Sakura didn't even flinch. She knew she could count on Gaara, and sure enough she saw sand form a protective shell on her left side, blocking her from the demon's hand. At the same time, she saw a small ink bird fly into the demon's eyes, once again blinding it. Sai had already started with long-range support, which gave them an opportunity. Gaara, hold it down. She called out. One blow wasn't enough to kill it, but maybe. Sakura waited, holding her breath for the brief second it took for Gaara's sand to snake up around the demon's legs. She pulled both of her arms straight back behind her, and once the demon was secured, she threw her arms forward in an arc. Simultaneously, her fist slammed against the sides of the demon's head, crushing it between them. She watched as the head caved with a sickening crunch, but there was no blood, no viscera, almost more like she'd just pounded on clay. However, after the blow had hit, the demon fell to the ground and moved no more. One down. She'd need to hit them hard, but she'd already proven she could do it. Sakura, northeast. She heard Sai's voice call out, and as she glanced in the direction he mentioned, she saw one of the demons sprinting away. She let her rock gauntlets fall off for the moment, granting her the dexterity to use hand signs. Next to her, she saw Gaara slam his hands to the ground, creating a wall of solid sand that stopped the demon in its tracks. Another opening for her. Quickly, her hands flew, and as she put her own hand to the ground she focused on the demon's location, visualizing in her mind the density and thickness of the earth, how much chakra she would have to use, and picturing, not a pillar, but a spike. Earth shot up from the ground in front of the demon, and pierced its chest clean through. The demon twitched, and it moved no more. 2 down. Sakura turned to scan the area. By the look of things, Kakashi had already taken down 2 of his own, and Fu had wrapped up 2 more in what looked to be a web-like substance. Not dead, but disabled. That left 2 more to finish off. With another call out from Sai, Sakura saw one of them heading towards her from her right. It was time, she decided, to test out a new move that Oniki had taught her. She went through several more hand signs, this time letting her chakra flow through her body and into the ground. It was a connection, like Shikaka had told her, and with that connection she could shape the earth how she willed it. Quickly, smoothly, the earth at her feet formed sharp spikes, and with a push of her chakra she sent a dozen of them flying towards the demon in front of her. A few missed, but enough hit to stop the demon dead in its tracks. 3 down by her hand, and it wasn't long before Kakashi had neutralized the final one with a well-placed Chidori. That had been easy. Sakura grinned, folding her arms as she surveyed the battlefield. Not a single one of her party had gotten hurt, the demons had been taken care of, and Fu had 2 live ones caught in her web. With you guys here, We can wrap these freaks up and take them back to Taki to study. Fu told them, punching the air with a small hoop. I don't think we've had live ones in years. And you guys can take one of these bodies to show the other villages proof that they exist. Sai, at least, had a storage scroll big enough to do just that. And even if he was planning on sending it straight to Root, that still meant Konoha would have proof enough. And if Konoha could be convinced, so could other villages. This could work out. Now all she had to do was convince Taki that she was here to help. Come on, Pinky. Fu slapped her heartily on the shoulder, the strength of it almost causing Sakura to buckle. Shibuki will definitely want to meet with you now that you've helped me out. Help me carry these fucks back home, will ya? Sakura glanced back at the two surviving demons, unable to even struggle under the strength of Fu's jutsu. This had to be a good sign of things to come. Didn't it? Check the description for the links to the author.